So my name is Cynthia Bendickson. I'm the Executive Director at Greenways Land Trust. We're an environmental charity based in Campbell River, and we do a lot of work restoring our natural environment and connecting people with our natural environment as well. So I've chosen to read from Measure of the Year, which was published in 1950, and it's a passage about birds and estuaries, and I do a lot of work in the Campbell River estuary, continuing to do restoration work there, and this passage speaks a lot to me about the estuary and the importance of estuaries from a very poetic level. I really love this passage and the poetry that it provides. So I'll start now. I had not meant to write so much of boats or of the sea itself. My concern is rather with the edges of the sea, the beaches and bluffs and tide flats, the river mouths and the saltwater meadows. The British Columbia coast is rocky and mountainous. Miles and miles of its length are deep inlets and sounds, always with mountains rising steeply from the water to 4,000 or 5,000 feet. And a boat can pass safely almost anywhere within a cable's length of the shore. But at the heads of the inlets and bays, where the rivers come down, there are meadows and sloughs and tide flats. This is the country of ducks and geese and bears and salmon. It is beyond the reach of roads, and I love it. There are well-known places at the head of one or two of these longer inlets, where hunters go every year in some numbers. Usually we stay away from these and hunt out new places, guessing at their virtue from maps and charts, from rumor, and more rarely, dependable hearsay. There are many places. A lifetime would not hunt them all. A dozen lifetimes could not learn a tenth of them thoroughly. Yet each is one's own place for the time one is there. Rocks and sandbars and tide changes become familiar, the twisting river channels. The potholes and sloughs of the meadows are learned and understood in a day or two. Even the flight lines and the feeding patterns of the birds begin to take on some measure of predictability and shape. And there is always something new for the next day, another fork of the river, a chain of lakes inland beyond the meadow, another bay within the bay where the geese lighted or the ducks rafted during the shooting. I can think of one deep bay we go to, wide open to the northwesterlies, only a little better protected from the southeaster, where the widgeon feed by the thousands. A little river comes in at the head of the bay, and sand flats dotted with great rocks dry out from it for half a mile at low tide. Usually there are 4 of us hunting together, and we go in very quietly, not shooting at all. 2 in the dinghy and 2 in the canoe. As we come near the head of the bay, the widgeon begin to move. A few small flocks swing out past us, and the masses of birds feeding along the semicircular shoreline stir restlessly. Other flocks fly in and out, then one of the big concentrations, 2,000 or 3,000 birds, takes wing in formidable sound. For a moment they are all together, white wing patches flashing, then they are 100 smaller flocks swinging out, past us and over us. Other masses stir and go out until the beach is empty, and something between 5,000 and 10,000 birds have left the stranded seagrasses at the tide's edge. Long before we reach the head of the bay and set out decoys, flocks of 7 and 10 and 20 or more birds are coming in again. Sometimes circling and going out again, sometimes pitching and going back to their feeding as though they had never been disturbed, sometimes rising almost as they pitch. We set out our few decoys, rarely more than half a dozen to each of us, hide ourselves and wait. At first we shoot seriously, picking the bald-pate widgeon drakes, watching carefully for the occasional mallard or pintail or shoveler. But the flocks come in and in on their swift wing beats, riding up the left side of the bay, swinging across the front of us, flickering towards the decoys, flaring away, turning back to the next set, often pitching a little way out or in between the sets. It no longer seems important to shoot, only to see and see and see. To watch the lovely flight, the swift turns and changes and twists, the setting of wings, the sudden drop and hissing pitch to the decoys. It is important to see the white-crowned head of the drake in flight, to catch the shine of green along its side, to feel the richness of the warm red-brown of breast and flank. The whole bay is movement and color and light, in mood and values that are never twice the same because weather changes everything. We have shot the bay in the face of a heavy northwester that drove alternations of ice-cold rain and pale sunshine across it on a rising tide. That was a day when the widgeon flew and flew with a wild determination lovely to watch. We have shot the long foreshore at dawn on a dead low tide, and in evenings when the rocks stood black against pale water and pale sand. There have been calm days when the flocks came in more cautiously and with longer circlings and hesitations, but they still came. And windy days when great tides crowded us back into the salal brush along the edge of the timber, and the ducks swung to the decoy set in the lee of a fallen spruce, whose trunk and broken limbs were shaggy with seaweed from the swells sweeping over them.